What is going on, guys? This video is going to be about gatekeeping and hobbies and what I think about it. Do I think it really exists? This is something that I see talked about a lot online, and I think I might have a bit of a different opinion on it than some other people, but I just wanted to really kind of dive into this because it seems like if you're in any kind of niche online community, there are going to be people who proclaim themselves as proud gatekeepers and as defenders of the culture, and I do think that some of that stuff does exist, particularly on the internet. You get a lot of very passionate, very outspoken, loud people, and I personally think that in real life, the stuff doesn't really exist, and when it does, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I think what it really is, like, you know, this is something I see a lot in particular communities I'm in online, like the comic book community or the heavy metal community. Like, I see this kind of stuff, particularly if you are a woman in a more male-dominated space. There may be some people who feel like you need to prove yourself a little bit more. You know, maybe a metalhead might see someone wearing a shirt and ask, oh, name 3 songs, that kind of thing. That's something that's definitely happened to me, particularly more when I was younger, but it does still happen. I do still get people saying, oh, do you actually listen to Slayer, or are you just wearing the shirt because it's cool? And that's not necessarily because of anything I did, but more because of what the social stigma is about seeing a younger person wearing a band shirt, a Metallica shirt, something like that, when you can buy them at Target. And I think a lot of the idea of gatekeeping, particularly gatekeeping women, I think it has a lot more to do with social stigma than the gatekeepers actually making any meaningful impact. And that social stigma, while it still does exist, I think it's a lot less prevalent nowadays than it used to be. I've heard people, particularly in the metal community, but this also, I think, applies to comic books, where the gatekeeping was a lot stronger in the 90s, and you might still have that comic shop owner that doesn't want to sell you a book because you don't know enough, or particularly in metal, I really don't think that it's much of a thing at all. I mean, I've been going to metal shows in some form since I was about 18 years old, and I've never felt gatekept at a show. Yeah, there might be some people online who say something goofy. Maybe someone is less likely to take me seriously because of superficial things, but I think personally that says more about the person saying that than actually about me. It's not going to stop me from coming on here and sharing my thoughts with you guys just because, you know, there might be some people who are put off by seeing a woman talk about it. You know, that says more about them than it does about me. And I think that's really what a lot of this is. You know, there are some people I see in comic books. I think it's a lot more frequent in comic books these days than it is in metal. And there are a lot of them that I've seen, they do go down the road of blaming women, saying there are too many female writers. I've even heard some people say that they should fire all the female writers in comics right now. And I mean, women have been making comic books since the start of comic books. They may not get the same recognition today as some of their male peers did, but that doesn't mean that they weren't there, and that doesn't make their contribution to comics any less important. I think right now there's just an issue with a lot of bad writing in comic books, and a lot of people are looking for someone to point the finger at, although one of the most popular comic books coming out right now, Absolute Wonder Woman, some even say it's better than Absolute Batman, was written by Kelly Thompson. Someone like Jenny Frison, Peach Momoko, there are so many people that are making a mark on comic books today, and it doesn't matter that these guys online say, oh, all female comic creators should be fired, they're still selling books. And that's what's important, I think. So there may be people who try and gatekeep, but they're not going to stop you. If it's something that you feel strongly about, if it's a hobby that means a lot to you, then it's not going to matter. You know, I've had people kind of come at me, or one that I got kind of recently that was a bit funny was that because I talk about comic books, that means that my critique or analysis of any other media is automatically invalid. Like, I'm not allowed to be a movie buff because I primarily choose to talk about comic books. But the reason I primarily choose to talk about comic books is because it's the most fun to talk about for me. I think the community is the best. I love film. I'm a film snob. I've talked about it a lot. And I have done film reviews. I've done music reviews on YouTube in the past. And of all the communities that I've kind of been a part of, I think the comic book one is the most strong, the most genuine, just the most genuinely nice people. Like, I love movies, but the film community aren't necessarily the most fun people, if you catch my drift. But I enjoy media analysis. I enjoy looking for deeper meanings in film or text, and just because I mainly talk about comic books, and that's just also ridiculous. The people who think that comic books can't have a deep story, that is also just very ignorant, and I think that's what a lot of it is. It's ignorance. And most of the collectors I've come across, most of the comic shop owners, they like to see women and younger people and the less traditional comic shop customer, and I think that it's important that we continue to have that. Again, I wasn't around during the 80s and 90s, so this is me speaking from my experience growing up in the 2000s, 2010s, and being a teenager in the 2010s, I never really experienced much gatekeeping. And again, going back to the idea of social stigma, I think for me, the idea of walking into a comic shop, it felt more like there was a social stigma against me going in there, and that was kind of my own internalized anxiety that kept me away from this hobby for so long. And when it came to metal, I never really felt that way. Although sometimes there are people who think I'm there for my husband and maybe go to talk to him first over me. I think, again, that's just more the social stigma thing. I don't think anyone has ever tried to gatekeep me, and if anything, people tend to get more excited when we talk a little bit more and they realize, like, okay, you actually do know what you're talking about here, and they think it's cool. And the same goes with metal shows. Like, I've never walked into a show and felt out of place. I've never had anyone approach me and treat me in a weird way. Like, and I think this is a bigger thing online, but when you really go to a lot of metal shows and, like, even small, obscure shows that I've been to, there's always just this sort of level of community that people have. Like, we're all here for the same purpose. We're all here to enjoy the night, maybe let off some steam in a healthy way, and again, this is just my experience, but I think it's important to share, because I do think that while it's going away, that social stigma does still exist, and I think it's important to break that stigma as much as possible. So me just being here in front of my little wall of comic books, I'm telling you that I don't think gatekeeping exists. There are just people that are rude, and no matter what you do, you're gonna have people getting upset. You're gonna have people that aren't totally happy with what you're doing, and you know what? Let them stay mad, you know? For every one person that might invalidate my opinion, there are at least a dozen more who are supportive and excited to see me taking part in this. And, you know, it's kind of interesting to me, since we're talking about comic books and metal music. I think the whole, like wearing a t-shirt and asking someone to name 3 songs thing is just so silly, because when you look at comic books, I'd say the elitist attitude in comics is a lot more prevalent these days, but still, you wouldn't walk up to someone wearing a Batman shirt and ask them to name 3 Batman comics, you know? Like, that's just... Again, I think it comes more from the social stigma of it. Like, there are enough comic book movies or adaptations in some form that if we see somebody, we don't necessarily assume that they have to be a collector to enjoy Batman memorabilia. Maybe they just really like the Michael Keaton movie, you know? But, and it's so interesting to me because on one hand, yeah, there are always going to be those people who try to gatekeep, but also it doesn't have any meaningful impact if you understand that those people are just being assholes. You hear people talk about posers, or in comic books I hear people refer to them as comic book tourists. That's kind of the new thing I hear, like people who might be into some comic adjacent stuff and kind of adopt the persona of a comic collector, but when it comes to these niche hobbies, like heavy metal, or like comic books, I don't think anyone is faking a love of it. Like, maybe, but where is that really getting you, you know? I've heard clips from metal guys on podcasts who have said that there are no women that are actually into metal. It's all a sexual thing. It's all to get men. Most men just like women and don't expect them to listen to the same music as them. I mean, of course, if you find someone that does share your love of music and other interests that can make your relationship a lot better. I think that with my husband and I, we say we went on our first date at a metal show and we became best friends because we were both just into metal. And there weren't any romantic feelings until later on. Like, just like what you like. I think that's just the takeaway of this video. Just like what you like. Just be nice to people and have a good day. Peace out.